Welcome everyone. I'm Andrew Stuck from Walk, Listen, Create, and we're running this event in part to celebrate the 10th anniversary of something called the Sideways 2012. Now, I have to admit, I had a hand in this in a bar in Barcelona in 2008 at a Walk 21 conference when I was not allowed to join the Carver reception because I wasn't a VIP. I sat amongst the leftovers in the bar, and we got to talking. And there were four of us, and the four were Andy van der Veer, Martin Kohler, and Peter Ank. And what we chatted about was what we thought would be a really clever and crafty idea would be to have a nomadic walking festival where we actually organised walking art festival where people would come along and they would walk somewhere and we'd go from A to B. And what we agreed was we thought what we'd do is whoever got nearest to making it happen, the other three would help them. That was the kind of deal. And Andy van der Veer from an outfit called Trager Vegan in Belgium, in Ghent in Belgium, was the man who stepped forward and said, I've got this opportunity to create a nomadic walking festival. And it took place in 2012. And there were some people who were involved directly in that, and some who know all about it as well. And it was a pretty extraordinary thing. I mean, it was a run over a month, but we walked 4 days, and then I had a day of rest, and then a weekend where we joined a local art festival and contributed our own walking art efforts to those local walking artists events. And it was bookended by a couple of symposium, which were a bit more sort of academic-y and research-like. It was a phenomenal event. But I think what's kind of interesting is when I went out in search of people who'd been and said, would you like to come and join us and talk about it? I didn't really get that many people. Not many of the people who were involved directly actually want to get involved and talk about it. And what was really quite significant was Andy van der Veer said it was one of the worst things he ever did in his life. And he never wanted to have anything to do with it again. And don't talk to me about walking artists. So, that's a kind of interesting little aside there. Andy still works for Trager Vegan. And Geert, I don't know whether you could explain a little bit about what Trager Vegan is. From what I understand, it's a campaigning organisation, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. It's an organization that supports everybody that wants to walk in all its shapes and formats in Flanders. You may not expect this because Belgium is a country of 10 million people and they have 1 million members. So the 10% of the population is actually a registered member of Trage Wegen, slow paths, and is taking part in their activities, which is promoting all forms of slow movement and walking along the country. Not specifically in an artistic way. We will come back to that. You made some very interesting remarks about that as well, Andrew. And that was also one of the reasons this mother of all walking arts encounters was never repeated. The support that he received for this event was so minimal, also from inside his organization and from the government, that he said never again, although it was just, he put walking arts on the map for a decade, like we are experiencing now. But nevertheless, this organization, with their focus on walking, slow movement, nature experience by foot, is immensely important in Belgium, and actually not only there, also in the UK and other countries. Walking gathers millions of people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Het. That's terrific. And so, what I thought I'd better do, the great news is we do have some people who were part of Sideways, and I'm hoping they're going to chip in and say things. But what I've tried to collect is I've tried to bring together a group of people who each have in turn had some role themselves in organising walking art events, interventions, exhibitions, etc. And what I'm just going to invite each of them in turn to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they foresaw when they were planning what they were doing and what they could do to make things stand out, to make walking art greater and broader. Now, what we'd love you to do is everyone to chip in into the chat with questions that you want to sort of pose, or questions that you think we should really be chatting about, not just about events in the past, but looking to things in the future. So, who'd like to go first? Is it is it alphabetical order by first name? Is it going to be Claire first? Shall we put Claire on the spot?
Yeah, I'm happy to be, I can be put on the spot if you like. Hi everyone, my name's Claire Qualman. I'm in London right now with incredibly bad lighting. I apologise for that. You'd think by now I'd have sorted out how to light a online call. I'm an artist and an academic, and I was one of the founders of the Walking Artists Network, which I continue to kind of facilitate in a very light touch way. So I was involved in Sideways. In fact, Andy got in touch with me about a year before the Sideways Festival, when he was still working on the planning stages. And I went over to meet him in Ghent with Mark Hunter, a colleague who was then a colleague of mine at the University of East London, and we had a really great kind of discussion with Andy, a walk around Ghent, and a kind of talk about how we might bring some elements from the Walking Artists Network into the Sideways Festival. So through that, we kind of agreed that the Walking Artists Network, which at that moment in time had some Arts and Humanities Research Council funding, some UK research funding, that we would kind of host the final weekend of the Sideways Festival. So we would kind of support some of the artists to be part of that, and that we would also support some of the artworks that were going to be happening along the long walk across Flanders. And at that point in time, one thing I really remember is that Andy was imagining that artists would join for sort of 3 or 4 days. They'd join for like a leg of the walk. But then actually what happened in reality was that all of the artists who kind of applied to do the walk wanted to do the whole thing. So I think there was a bit of a kind of shift in the thinking, that he'd kind of imagined that people would come and go and it would be a changing group. And I think that did happen a bit, but that quite a few of the artworks that happened on the walk carried on for the whole time. But I personally was just there for the final weekend in Zoetendaal, which was an amazing kind of weekend. It's quite an interesting moment to join the festival, because there was this very well bonded group of artists and walkers who had spent an incredibly intense 4-week period of time walking very, very long journeys, eating, sleeping, working together in quite kind of tricky circumstances. So to be a sort of fresh-footed interloper at that point of the experience was definitely quite a sort of different space. But yeah, maybe I'll stop there for now, and I can come back to other things afterwards. I'm just kind of riffing on my remembering of Sideways.
Now, Claire, I think that's great. But what I'd also like to ask about is give us some idea of why you came to set up the Walking Artists Network, because the Walking Artists Network has been an amazing initiative and look at it. It won't go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
So tell us
Okay.
about that. What drew you to do that?
Yeah, so well, the Walking Artist Network was kind of inspired by so back in sort of 2006, 2007, I was working as part of a collective of artists called Walk, 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 an archaeology of the familiar and forgotten, which was me, Gail Burton, and Serena Corder. And at the core of that kind of art practice was a repeated night walk in East London. So kind of following a repetitive route through Bethnal Green and Shoreditch and Spitalfields, sort of touching on Whitechapel. And as we got very, I think we probably led about 20 walks over a period of 4 or 5 years. And we had a kind of consistent audience or group of participants that included quite a few other artists, many of whom were talking to us about how they were starting to use walking in their work as well, or had used walking in their work as well. So these were people like Melissa Bliss, Viv Corringham, Clive Brandon, and kind of through some discussions there, we were basically noticing that there seemed a kind of surge of interest in walking as within art practice, and so it felt like a kind of moment to try and gather those people together and say, is walking art a thing? Is this a new medium? Is it a medium that's already existed but hasn't yet been defined? What might we do if we were sort of loosely affiliated as a kind of network of people who were using walking in their work? And we called a meeting to kind of invite people to come and share their ideas of what they thought it might be or could do, which was a really lovely meeting. I think you were there, Andrew, at London Metropolitan University, and we had a few kind of short presentations. We had a really lovely discussion, and sort of the open call at the end for somebody to host the next meeting, and then it went quiet, and nobody kind of came forward to host the next meeting. So nothing happened for about 2 years, and then I got a job at the University of East London, and through that was able to apply for the Arts and Humanities Research Council funding, which led to the money basically to start making some stuff happen again. And that's when got involved in Sideways. So Sideways was one of the first main things that the Walking Artist Network did in terms of having a kind of open call for walking artists who might want to be involved. And actually it was in Dee and Misha's project, the Walking Library, that we made a call out to artists who might want to go and be part of Sideways, walking with Dee and Misha and the festival as part of their project. And that makes me wonder if that's a nice segue for Dee or Misha.
I think that's a great segue. I just want to welcome Clara. Clara, well done in making it here. We won't put you on the spot straight away, Clara, but very shortly I'm going to ask you, after maybe 2 or 3 others have spoken, to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what were the elements that you wanted to have happen during the grand tour to make it work and be successful. I also want to welcome Casper, because Casper and I walked together most of the length of Flanders. So it's great to see you, Casper, as well. So anyway, Dee, over to you.
Okay, thanks for that. And thanks for organising this, Andrew. And it's lovely to see some old familiar faces. And I mean old because I was 42 when I did Sideways, and I'm 52 now, of course. And I think actually a decade's quite a long time on the body, to be honest. And I wonder, well, would I be able to cope with the demands of Sideways travails now? I'm not so sure. I just suppose I want to begin my story into Sideways, I think, through talking, first of all, very briefly, referencing the work that I did with Cathy Turner, who was one of the co-founders of Rights and Sights, because actually before Sideways, Kathy Turner and I worked together on a research project that was funded by the British Council, not the British Council, sorry, British Academy, on women artists who used walking. And, you know, that was my sort of first, I suppose, focused foray into thinking about walking art. And Kathy and I, between us, interviewed either, you know, sort of 10 artists or sort of 10 organisations who were, you know, women as organisations, women's art collectives, individual women artists, to ask them, using walking as a method of research really, about their practice. And indeed one of those was Walk, 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 which brought me into the orbit of Claire Qualman, which brought me into the orbit of Walking Artists Network. Another of those artists was Misha Myers. And I won't say much about the Walking Library because I'll let Misha speak to that. But, you know, Misha and I worked and collaborated for the first time together on the Walking Library. That was the beginning of our collaboration. I'll let Misha tell the origin story of that. And as Claire's just intimated, it was fantastic because the Walking Artists Network, of which I was on the advisory group, supported us to have some volunteer librarians join us in Belgium for the month. Misha and I split the month between us, so we both did 2 weeks. And one of the volunteer librarians is Monique Beston, who's here this evening as well. And that was our introduction to Monique, who's just become like one of the most sort of grounded walking artists that I know, who just like keeps on walking and do these incredible walks. And Monique, you know, started a sort of embroidery walking practice at Sideways and has continued, and that's incredible, really. So there's sort of lots of threads and networks crossing this call, I guess. And I don't think Misha and I thought for a minute that the Walking Library would persist for a decade, but it has. And indeed, you know, in October it continues on a new adventure in Italy. So that's quite remarkable. And I think got a lot to thank Walking Artists Network for in really creating an environment in which that sort of collectivity and collaboration was possible. And I guess just to bring us up to date to now, I mean, I've done a few other walking things, but I suppose just to bring us up to this point, I'm collaborating still with Claire Qualman, and someone else is on the call this evening, Harry Wilson, on a funded walking research project called What Create, which was exploring walking and creativity during the pandemic lockdown in Britain and in the UK, and has commissioned quite a lot of artworks, art pieces, art collaborations, art contributions, art commissions over the last 18 months, really. So, you know, those seeds of walking planted with Kathy in 2010, you know, persist. And I think the journey's not over yet. I'm very grateful to everyone who's facilitated and supported, I guess, that long duration of both practice and research together. Thank you for organising this, Andrew. Lovely to see folk.
Oh, that's great. Well, we won't leap straight to Misha, because we've got a couple more in between. So what we'll do is Fiona next, then Het, then Misha, and then Clara, yeah? Is that okay? Everyone fine about that? And please, if anyone's got any questions, you know, I've noticed the chat is completely empty, apart from lovely to see you, D, and things like that, which is nice. Don't get me wrong. I'd love you to send secret messages to people backwards and forwards. You can do that, direct messages, if you don't want to make them public, by the way. Yeah, do please throw in some questions about, you know, I can think of dozens of questions already, but over to Fiona.
Yeah, hi. Lovely to see you all. And I'm happy also to see so many familiar faces, although I haven't been part of Sideways because I got into walking art and doing research about that afterwards. So I'm art historian, and I started getting into walking art because I wrote my dissertation about Hamish Fulton, and realized that there's so much more to get to know, because this is such an interesting way to express what's going on in the world. So walking as an artistic practice really catched my interest, and I decided to continue working with it. And I went to Prespa a few years ago, 2019. I met so many interesting and lovely people, and that was really inspiring. And so I decided it would be a great thing to just organize an exhibition about walking art and bring it out into the international art scene. There have been some exhibitions already all over the world, the places, in Switzerland also, but I managed to bring it into Schönkunsthalle in Frankfurt. And what was important for that, because it has already had exhibitions about walking art and the history about walking, we decided on showing what is the actual state of the art. So what is walking as an artistic practice? What does walking help understanding more about the problems we have, or the situations or the issues of today? So that was very interesting to see just really contemporary works. Although we had some historical names, already historical names, because walking art as a practice is old. It's older than 60 years. So most of us, we all know the history. So it was important for me to show how many political aspects and socially and critical aspects can be introduced to the world outside of the artist world. And this is what I was hoping to present with this exhibition. And not only show artworks coming out of the practice, but also showing art walks and the mixture of bringing together the people in the city into the museum, but also bringing the audience and the visitors out of the museum into the city of Frankfurt. And I think, although COVID did have an influence in the first, because Germany did have some more strict rules, it was lowering the start initially, and then we had the war in the Ukraine, which also led to other ideas of what one should talk about. But it was also good to have these situations, because all these topics would also be reflected in the artworks shown in our exhibition. So that was the aim, bringing it out there. And there's still so much to show and to research about it. So the walking sideways 10 years on is also, for me, what can be done next, and the potential walking as an artistic practice has. Let's go further and beyond.
Great, thank you so much. That's really good. Okay, over to Gert.
Good evening, and as I said before, it's already a pivotal evening to have such beautiful and wonderful people together that together I think represent more than a century of walking arts in their experiences and activities. Now, my history starts as well 2 decades ago. I go a bit back in before the Big Bang, when I, together with Stefan van Biesen, I started a group which was called the Millennia Principle. Stefan van Biesen, who is also a Belgian artist, we met at an exhibition where we worked together on a walking work which was called the Library of Walks, which had also its own history till a few years ago. And in the beginning, we were mainly interested in how we could transform traveling into works of art. Very much inspired by a painting of Gustav van der Woestijnen, which is called Hospitality for Strangers, which he painted when he was in the mid of the 1910s in the UK, and where many Flemish refugees were received by people in the UK. And on that painting there was somebody traveling with a backpack. And the whole idea was to create works of art by traveling with groups around Europe, just taking a backpack and creating an exhibition that was fitting in a backpack. Around the idea of hospitality, working in houses of people, never going to hotels, but also always staying in places where we were received well. And the walking was always part of that. Eventually I moved to Brazil, exactly in that pivotal year of 2011-2012, after having lived 1 year in Portugal, where I worked together and became part of a group which was called Escoitar. They were among the pioneers of sound mapping and locative media. They were, if not among the first, that created an open access app to create your own soundwalks, based on collaboration, on bottom-up storytelling, and on inviting people to approach the environment on an intuitive, on a more personal, subjective way, and to share their experiences with others about the places where they live. With the idea to bring together groups of people, remotely and personally. In Escoitar was mainly a very poetical group, although we were composed by technologists, by the historians, by musicians. There was always a desire to see and to discover the poetry of a place, and to the imaginary, and then how the imaginary can transform the world around us. Now, this Notus, which was a walking project, lasted for 5 years, and was a profound as well introduction for me into the potential of sound and walking. So in 2015 I started with an encounters which was called Made of Walking. Actually, in the wake of what we were doing with the MENA principle, it was never meant as an encounters just bringing people together. It was meant as a work of art. The whole idea was to meet with people on a place where they were never before, where they were literally lost, that they would discover together, and where they would be lost together. The whole idea of being lost together was a main approach we had, and as well very strictly out of an artistic approach. Although I work together with academics, I'm not an academic. I don't have any intention to give an academic the dimension to what I do. That out of choice, and I embrace academics in an artistic context. And that's one of the questions that you have raised, Andrew. Yes, what is walking arts beyond academic? Because in the walking arts lives, that's marvelous, fantastic. It's incredible how walking arts lives inside of academia. And what is the position of walking arts that in this non-academic world now? The Made of Walking encounters were actually organized twice, once in July, once in August. In July they were focused on walking and getting lost together in an unknown landscape, where people traveled to for the first time, a remote place. And the second in August was focused on sound, more exploring the potential of sound walking in all its elements. This then sort of merged with the great idea of Andrew to start a sound walk Sunday, which became a sound walk September, and got its own life online and with crowdsourced events around the world. And July encounters to meet in a remote place was transferred into the Prespa event in 2019, which is still continuing and has its satellites in other countries, in Portugal, for example. Now, this encounters are specifically artistic. Although they have their conferences, they embrace the collaborations with researchers, but we try to bring together two worlds and not just to see them as separate, but as two sides of the same coin. And by inviting researchers to take part in the artistic walks, the workshops, and as well to invite artists to perform or to bring their work during what is an academic conference. I'll leave it here for now. One thing saying that the future of walking arts, but we are looking for very closely as well with Walk, Listen, Create, which is actually a community that also grew aside and together with Made of Walking, is that we are looking for a global community, including the Global South in our interest to explore and to promote and to stimulate people to discover and to work with walking arts. It's not easy because we are the cultural differences can be very big, and it's not very easy to get people from the Global South to involved in what we do, which is another interesting question we can discuss how to solve that. But from the beginning on, we, by definition, we see ourselves as a global community. I'll leave it to here for now. It's a lot already, and look forward to discuss more.
Great, thank you so much, Gert. That's great. Misha, your turn next. Are you up for it?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Definitely. All right. Well, yeah, well, interesting. On that last note, I'll say I have just returned from the Global South, from Australia back to the UK, moved to Australia in 2016. And I have to say, I am so happy to be back here, and because I am walking all the time. I can walk just everywhere. And it's interesting just hearing Gareth talk about that, because I found it really challenging to walk in Australia. Hard to find paths. I mean, the city of Melbourne, fantastic, you know, for walking, but, you know, beyond everything is, you know, you either have very short paths or very long ones, which are very, very difficult in terrain and wild, you know, kind of, well, wild, difficult word, but yeah, just kind of challenging terrain to walk in. So yeah, it's interesting that it's very different kinds of walking everywhere. To Sideways and Walking Library, gosh, okay, where to start? I mean, you know, it was this kind of crazy idea, and Dee approached me. We had both, I had spoke at the Museum of Modern Art in Edinburgh with Alec Finlay, and something that Alec was talking about, you know, reading on top of a mountain, a poem about the mountain, the place, really struck me. And Dee was very interested in the kind of literature that, you know, people mentioning carrying books. And this is something, so she contacted me and said, would you be interested in, you know, putting together something for Sideways? We always tell this story differently, don't we, Dee? and how we emphasize our different ways into that. But the conversation was that let's put forward something for this festival of walking. And the question really, I had written a question out to I don't know, was it the Walking Artists Network, or was it the Scud, now Drama HE, asking people, what book are you carrying with you for a walk, this summer? It was the summer. And that was kind of where, we were looking at the literature and looking at, Virginia Woolf, at John Muir, at the romantic, poets and writers, carrying books. And so the question, why? What do we, what is it about that book as a companion, the reading it in situ? So it's a very kind of simple idea, the simple question of what book would you take on a walk? And so that became the kind of starting point for what we proposed for Sideways. And then it became this incredibly elaborate library we were carrying a physical library, which we're absolutely committed to the book. And Andrew, you, I think, were the first person to ask, why not a Kindle? And, it was very much about the social aspect of that, which is very much part of my work. It's really important. And I think Dee's too, is that kind of participatory work. That's what I wrote my PhD about, walking with refugees. And instructional kind of invitations that make that a kind of question, that walk, that guides that walk, and a dialogue. And the books that we carried, in some way, that's what they were. They were the response of the public telling us what book they would carry. So we carried it for them. And then we collected donations as we went. But we also, the amazing thing about Sideways was not only just the kind of duration of it, and we were traveling as a kind of small village. And that's what it felt like. Like we were this kind of self-sufficient little village that was moving across. And we were the library, and we performed that. We had our librarians funded by Walking Artists Network, which was fantastic. And we had our badges, the Walking Library. We had a card catalog. We had a stamp where we stamped the books. And we had a lending card for the artist on the walk so they could take out books. Now, we've had many different editions since that. And I can't remember how many, hold up your fingers to or come in. But, we've been commissioned. We commissioned by Walking Artists Network for Women Walking. So we did the Walking Library for Women Walking. Just did the Walking Wild City, working with Alec Finlay again. Yes, 8 editions. Walking for forest walks with National Forest. We have done a residency last year online because of the pandemic with the Museum of Loss and Renewal in Italy, and doing it in person very shortly in October. Although Dee will have to do that remotely, sadly. Can't join. This is kind of, we've been passing the baton since Sideways with, one of us picking up, and with me in Australia, Dee had to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But we've been working together this way remotely for a decade. It's kind of amazing, and it just keeps going. People keep approaching us. This simple idea they find engaging. But I just, I think about it. It's been really interesting just thinking about back to Sideways and it was really, we embodied the library, I think, the most of any project, that we really got to live in it and find out what it was and what we could do. And we developed a methodology through it, which, evolved. Yes, sadly, no heavy lifting for Dee. Sorry, this is in a chat. Dee's, yeah, Dee's got, back injury, and sadly no more carrying books at the moment, which I know that did us in at moments, carrying all those books, did my shoulder in for the very start of Sideways. But yeah, so it was that kind of, performing it, which was really interesting, and the conversations with people that we met along the way who donated books, and that really kind of challenged our thinking about it, to pull it away from a kind of, English-centric, a kind of, British-centric, or even just, English language-centric project, and to really think about where are we walking, and the questions that we ask, the context. And I think that was one of the things that struck me about Sideways. I mean, it's interesting that Andy says that, because I think that, kind of wanted to wash his hands of it. Because I think it was an incredibly powerful gesture, and this is what walking can do, and it's what I've written about a lot, about walking as placemaking, one, and then also as a kind of activism by stealth. We were walking those paths, those green paths, the slow ways, the sideways of Belgium, which are being erased and paved over with motorways and a incredibly, this complex network of roadways which are just taking over, the paths to walk across this. And having just come from Australia, what I started with, it's like, that is so important, that ability to just be able to walk. And what strikes me here, coming back here, it's just so incredible how, free it is just to be able to walk out your door and go and travel all of these kind of circuits for miles and miles and miles. So I think that's something that was really powerful about it. And what's, I think, really important to kind of keep going really into the future, and to find those ways to encourage people to, the importance of that act. It's a kind of, it can be an individual act, but repeated over and over again. I've been thinking about this a lot because I work with technology, and that's one of the things that I guess has become my particular focus and expertise in how we engage with place through walking and the technology and the stories of place. But those works that kind of take people, especially with a kind of activist intent, I'm thinking of like platforms. While London Burns, I wrote about that work, how the people who walk that over and over again and stand outside the window of Swiss Re looking at them in their office becomes a kind of collective action. And that's what, was really powerful, I think, in what happened at Sideways. And there are many other examples of where that occurs. And, it's one of the influences, I think, that's been really important from the women walking library was the suffragettes, and thinking about the way that the suffragettes walked as a political action. And that became a really important part of the walking library with that library. But I think it's also something that kind of making place for women, making place for women in the world, making place for women in the history of walking arts, to be acknowledged for that place, and to walk that place in it. So I'll stop there. That's enough of that. Yeah.
Misha, that's great. A couple of things just quickly come to mind. One of which is with the walking library. I'm really fascinated by the fact that you were commissioned, I believe, for the National Forest, but also you've done an edition, have you not, at Timber Festival? Is that right? And that's maybe Dee or yourself can just mention what Timber Festival is, because a lot of people probably won't know.
Yeah, so I mean that was one of the batons that was my baton, because Misha was in Australia at that point, but we did do a bit remotely. So the Timberfest, the National Forest is in the Midlands, National Forest Company, and they commissioned a walking library for forest walks. So really, Andrew, it's actually the National Forest has that library, because what Misha maybe didn't say is that all of the collections are handed on and handed over to whoever commissions them. So the National Forest now has the walking library for forest walks. But they work in collaboration annually with the Timber Festival, which is a 3-day festival in the National Forest, which is really focused on all things wood and forests. And so it was meant to happen in 2020. Of course, it didn't. Happened in 2022. So finally, the Walking Library for Forest Walks was taken down and delivered to the National Forest and inaugurated at the Timber Festival then, Andrew. So, and it's still down there.
And Timber Festival is a big event, isn't it?
It's a big event. I mean, it's a big event. It's an environmental, ecological focus. It's camping, it's music, it's art, it's installation. It's a 3-day. It's a 3-day festival. It's a 3-day outdoor festival in the woods, basically.
Yeah.
really.
And do you know what numbers it attracts? Because it's,
I
you know,
don't. I couldn't hazard a guess on that, but the tickets sell out very quickly.
yeah, I mean,
I mean, it's not massive, Andrew, because they don't want to destroy the site, but it's a few thousand,
yeah.
I guess, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's not Glastonbury.
It's not Glastonbury, but it's a lot more than many walking art events. So, I mean, it's fantastic
Yeah.
to have walking art
That's true.
within it, incorporated within it. No, that's brilliant.
Well, and the other thing is to on the same note, like Morag Rose was there at the same day. Our colleague and collaborator, who many will know, founder of the Loiterers Resistance Movement, which has been going for about 15 years. She was a speaker there talking about disability and walking. Just picking up on Barbara's comment, in the comments. So there is a lot of interest, I think. I mean, that's one of the things I did want to say, but we'll come back to that. That actually, festivals do program walking art, I guess. Anyway, we can come back to that in part of the discussion.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Misha. And now, Clara. Clara, is Clara there?
Yeah. Good night, everybody. Here I am. Sorry for being late, and sorry because I will not be able to stay long, but at least just showing up to say hello and to congratulate to be all with you. Many of you, I think, know about Grand Tour, which has been done for 8 years now. We have just finished 15 days ago, and which is a long walking travel with artists of all the disciplines. And let me take the words of Gerd, who was saying a moment ago that he was thinking of transforming traveling onto works of art. Well, our goal is transforming works of art onto traveling and somehow freeing walking from art somehow. My idea is that art was a very collective activity, a very collective treasure of all the cultures, and it has been so for many centuries, and it is a matter of specialists only since 4 or 5 centuries, and I think it's time to go back to another situation, to another paradigm. Of course, you can have lots of offering their abilities and sharing their abilities, but the essential are it is deeply involved with the and with the intelligence of everybody, and so what we are trying to do in Grand Tour more and more is avoiding artists to go there and perform or show or do their own individual work, and enhancing and suggesting them to really get involved in this act of sharing something which is going beyond art, because there are still things that go beyond art. And things as walking, physical effort, nature, also hospitality, and all the surprises, unexpected things that we find in the way, especially when the travel is long enough, as Grand Tourist that lasts 3 weeks, help to dissolve these separations between artists and audiences in consuming and offering specialized tasks. Now, in Gran Tour,
We're having a few
we
problems,
walk.
Clara, with your.
Sorry?
We're having a few problems with your sound breaking up. would you like to try, if you
Oh,
close up your video, if you shut down your video, it may help the streaming of it.
okay. Can you hear better now? Is it improving somehow? Okay. So, well, I was nearly finishing. Besides Grand Tour, which is an important big project, annual project, and lasts 3 weeks and moves this year, for example, nearly 80 people. We have other activities like Walter Benjamin Grant and Walk, which will take place in November. Or just yesterday, for example, we were in the religious place of Montserrat, walking there, and the relationship between walking and spirituality in the monastic.
Oh, I'm afraid we're losing you, Clara.
Specialization. I'm sorry, I can do better.
It's not your fault, it's the internet connection, isn't it?
No. So also quoting here, he said, "Be walking arts. I say what." And involving, of course, art and much more other aspects and experiences of human life and of us as a community. I leave it here.
All right, I think we got the general gist of that. Thank you, Clara. I'm so sorry that the internet is breaking up a bit there. Okay, so we've heard from our sort of esteemed guests of our panel. I don't know whether anyone in the audience wants to chip in with anything. We've got a really nice question there from Barbara that Dee started to answer and mention about what happens with those people who are able and aren't able to walk. Casper's thrown in something a wobbly there about property laws and things like that. But Casper, do you want to say something? You did tread the boards of Sideways from start to finish.
If you want, what would you like to ask me? I don't think I and Susanna between us were there from start to finish, but I think we both had a period where we had to go away. And Annika was the only one of the family that was there the whole time, I think.
And how old was she then?
Yeah. She's just waiting for me to play something with her or watch something with her. Yeah, what would you like me to talk about, Andrew?
Well, I don't know. Would you like to say anything was it a profound thing for you, or because you've now drifted away from walking art and you're now a sustainable agriculture man? So maybe tell us a bit about that. Or
I don't think I ever categorised myself in that way anyway. To be honest, it was just part of a practice that was maybe just more of a way of engaging with people and where that would lead and so on. So I just ended up being surrounded by people who did call themselves that, and that was great. I mean, we did go after Sideways. We spent in Germany maybe 3.5 years really looking at guided tours in a tourism context in Stuttgart, where we lived. Invited lots of artists to work with us there and do different projects, which was kind of, looking at the politics of tours really, and subverting that or interrogating that or just exploring that in different ways. And then I moved back to Jersey where I grew up. So then things changed again, and we've set up a artist residency here, and then a food systems organization, which is busy now with all sorts. But yeah, I've never sort of categorized myself in that way. It's just part of life. I did wonder when Gerd was talking about the global south, whether maybe there's just perhaps one difference is that it's a bit demystified. It's maybe treated in a different way, that maybe people are still walking and engaging with that and thinking about that and doing stuff with that. without maybe categorizing it in the same way. I don't really know. It's quite a big thing, Global South. When you say that, it could mean an awful lot. But yeah. But otherwise, yes, it's certainly good to see everyone, and that's been our little journey afterwards. So there's been things that have, carried on naturally from that, for sure.
Well, before we go straight to the questions in the chat, Monique, would you like to say something? Because you're also a Sideways alumni or alumnus.
Andrew, I just to the comment I put before. Yeah, I suppose that it's interesting because it's just come up quite recently for me, and it reminded me a bit of the whole Sideways experience, that I met someone here and we were talking about local rights of way and the fact they don't really exist in the same way they do in the UK, because it's actually still a feudal system in many ways in terms of land ownership and rights, or it's certainly a bit different, and there's no sort of commons in the same way. The commons in Jersey is about an old feudal system, but there was a lawyer looking into historical paths and what's happened to them. Because there's a massive network of lanes which is people use, but there's a lot, all the paths that kind of crisscross between lanes. Pretty much most of them have disappeared, and I'm hoping to meet this lawyer and find out a little bit more about what he's been doing, and that might take me back a little bit to what we were doing on Sideways. I just switched my mute on because I kind of finished.
Yeah, Andrew, you asked me to say a few things.
Tell us a little bit about Sideways for yourself, but also what you're doing now, because you've someone described you, I can't remember, was it you who said you were the most rounded walking artist she knew? I mean, and we need to know, what does all that mean?
Well, first, I'm in Lithuania right now. So if anybody wonders why it looks a bit like weird around me, I'm in a little traditional farmhouse at the moment, herding sheep. It's part of an artist's residency. Yeah, I was in Sideways 10 years ago, and that really changed everything for me. It was kind of a moment in my life where I thought I want to do something else as an artist, and I wasn't really into walking. I mean, I was into walking as something I liked to do, but I didn't know anything about walking arts, walking artists, walking artist network, and I think I saw a call somewhere online for the walking library, and I volunteered, and then at Sideways I discovered there's this whole network and something called walking arts, and yeah, it was really amazing. After Sideways, I decided to only walk as an artist, or at least use walking as my main medium, and that worked out quite well, actually. Yeah, I was in the Grand Tour as well with Clara a couple of years ago, so that's also a connection there. And yeah, Sideways. Yeah, it's a pity they're not there. I tried to invite people and convince some people to be here tonight as well, because I'm still in touch with some people. It's a pity there are not more people. But I think for a lot of people it was really important, and the people I talk to, they do still talk about it. And I saw Sinta today posting a lot of things, and 10 years ago already. Yeah, since then I walked. I did a lot of long solo walks. Applied for a lot of residencies involving walking. Was invited to give talks about walking. At some point, I still don't know, like walking artist. At some point, people started to kind of like brand me as a walking artist, and for me, it's more about slow ways of being. And I think after I really focused on walking, it also kind of spread out a little bit. But walking is still very important. And I'm still like, when I was at Sideways, I was wearing a three-piece walking suit, as it is still officially called. That was actually sort of my entrance into the walking library. I thought I'd read somewhere that a business suit is still called a three-piece walking suit because people, when people started wearing suits, they kind of used the suit, just to go on daily strolls, but also they were wearing suits while working somewhere, sometimes mountaineering even. And I walked in during Sideways in a similar three-piece suit, and I was embroidering while walking, while carrying books, and I discovered that a business suit or a three-piece walking suit is actually really comfortable to walk in. And since then, I've been wearing suits for different walking projects. And this is a different suit. It's not the same suit as the suit from 10 years ago. But it's also, I'm currently in a project where I suit every day. It's not connected to the project in Lithuania, although I'm wearing it here as well. And I'm wearing the suit every day, and I'm embroidering questions from people I meet on my daily walks about the state of the world or the state of their own life. So this is also wearing a suit as a performative costume, also kind of came from Sideways. But I'm really still, when I think about Sideways, it's still so inspiring. Also, all the things that happened and all the people that were there, and also the Grand Tour. I was there in 2018, I think. Similarities as well, I think, between the two. Also, a lot of differences, but. If I would not have been a walking librarian, I also would never have ended up at the Grand Tour, I think. I'm sorry, I'm a bit like, it's really weird for me to be online because I'm really offline here, working with sheep, so I hope I make sense somehow. I'm only talking to sheep, so this is first time since a couple of weeks I'm actually with people online, but I stopped talking.
Well, I think you did really well, and it sounds fantastic. So thank you very much for chipping in. Okay, well, we've got about half an hour left. We want to get some discussion going. There's a question on the on disability and things. There's a question on how do we move it beyond academia. I'm still wanting to know what the sort of three key factors are for the three key elements you must have within whatever you do around promoting walking art as an event or an exhibition or something. Do you have to have walking involved in it? Is that a kind of thing that you have to have? Do you have to have kind of remoteness, taking people out of their comfort zone? Do you need to bring people together? Are walking art events just another way of bringing people together? Is there something more to walking art than that? Of course there is, but these are the kinds of things I'm interested in exploring, and also to think about how do we make it pay. This is kind of pretty critical. How do walking artists get into a position where we can make a living from our walking art, which is pretty limited. I have to admit, I don't think there's a professor of walking art yet. There might be. Anyway, anyone in the audience want to chip in and ask a question? Because that's the whole idea. Silence. Maybe can we get Barbara to ask her question though and voice that if she's there?
I've got to go. Be this
okay.
But there we go. Annika learned to walk at Sideways, and that's great. Everyone was saying it was going to be like, oh, she's stuck in the backpack the whole time. It's going to be really bad. And then one day she just decided to copy everyone else. But we've got to go now. So have a lovely evening, all of you, and hope to catch up soon.
Thank you for joining us anyway.
Lovely to see you again, Annika.
Bye, Annika.
Bye.
Bye. Love to see you.
Okay, Barbara, you have to top that now.
Yeah, that's hard. My question was about how the discourses around walking and art have changed or are changing or need to change around questions of ability. And like Dee, I'm very aware of living in a body that isn't as capable as it was 10 or 20 years ago. But there are lots of people who don't or can't walk for other reasons as well. And I was reminded also by Misha's comment about her PhD work about walking with refugees, that, you know, we're very lucky to be able to walk as artists, but most of the people who are walking in the world today are refugees and they have to walk. So there's a kind of imperative, I think, to have some consciousness about these things when we're in this privileged position of being able to walk as an artistic practice. So how do we bring these growing awarenesses into the discourse around walking, not just about disability, but about all of the different ways in which we define ourselves? That's my question. I know it's a huge one, but that's what I'm wondering about these days.
It's a really important one, Barbara. I can say something if that's all right, Andrew.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, definitely.
Because I think it's definitely been one of the questions that we've had in our minds in the research project that Dee mentioned that we've been working on over the last 18 months, which was, the frame for it was very much the COVID, the lockdown or the restriction stage of the pandemic. I don't mean to suggest that we've exited the pandemic, but the kind of first bit of lockdown. And as part of our research, we commissioned 8 artists to make walking works with different groups around the UK. And one of the things that we really had at the forefront of our thinking there was around what counts as walking, who gets to walk, who has the space and time and the capacity to walk. I think it's Phil Smith has used the term leisure walking plus to describe some walking art that requires not just great physical capacity, but also huge amounts of leisure time, the ability to get to the place from which the walking artwork is happening. And so we worked really carefully to try to ensure that our commissions worked a little bit differently. So Henna Asakainen, for example, worked with refugee and asylum seeker participants in Newcastle, walking in the city centre, which was a space where a lot of people hadn't visited because the spaces that they were accommodated in were on the periphery of the city and public transport was too expensive for them to use. So kind of disrupting the idea that walking in a city space is for everyone, because the distances to get to these lovely kind of pedestrianised, beautiful, historic public spaces of the city weren't available to them. Shona Short, another artist, worked in Bolton in Greater Manchester with parents and carers to look at the school run as a walk. So just the short walk back and forth to school every day, dropping off children. And Shona writes incredibly poetically and movingly about this absolute routine repetition of this walk, which is full of care and kind of protection of small children who but on one leg, and then on the return, that parents and carers are kind of liberated from that care. That kind of responsibility is handed over to the school for an amount of time, and so their return walk has this very different flavour to it. Kate Green worked in Leinster, which is on the Welsh borders in Herefordshire, with people who have dementia, on ways to open up walking and wandering that kind of downplayed the idea of destinations, to sort of try to address the stigma of being lost, of not being able to find your way, of forgetting where you're going. And some of the kind of tools and tactics she used there really kind of drew on remote walking or proxy walking. So she would be out walking with a live video feed, and people would be telling her where to go. I won't go on more, but there are some really lovely examples in those commissions, and I think these are really vital questions. And I wonder too if walking art might feel as a kind of general concept, rather than in some of these specific examples, might feel alienating to people who have to walk out of necessity, because it's a mode of transport, right? It's a way of getting where you have to go, and the privilege of just the time to enjoy it, or to enact it, or to walk, even as leisure, let alone as art, is quite huge.
Andrew, could I just come in for a minute on the back of that?
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, no, definitely. The idea is we have a discussion. So
it's quite hard because I don't see like a hand up function on Blue Jeans, so I just don't know the protocol. Okay,
let's not play.
I know, and I see Fiona had a hand up as well after me. Claire's offered a really good summary there. I suppose one thing I wanted to also ask us, to think about is that I think it's very easy for us to focus on the barriers to walking, but I think at the same time we need to focus on the barriers to arts engagement and cultural engagement, as either, in terms of empowerment, like who has access to making art. And I think that was the other thing that the Walk Create project was trying to hold in balance a little bit, was walking has barriers, but so does arts practice. And can you use the arts to engage folk in walking in all sorts of really creative ways, and thinking about the expertise that walking artists have in really creatively addressing some challenges there. So the proxy walk's a great example, and that term actually I think was coined by Alec Finlay. But Louise Ann Wilson talks about the surrogate walk, where actually the benefits of the imaginative walk should not be excluded from thinking about what walking might entail. So walking in the imagination, for example, can still have benefits even if it doesn't require one physically to leave one's house. So walking can also be undertaken indoors, etc. I think artists bring those sort of creative problem solving to all sorts of contexts. But equally, so can we use the art to engage walking? But can walking also be used as a way to open the barriers to arts and cultural engagement, and try and democratise that? And I think in Walk Create, we were really trying to, I suppose those are the terms, aren't they, bringing those together to see what might happen on either side of that equation, really. Recognising potential traction in both directions, trying to, persuade arts organisations to think about walking as a way that might literally bring down barriers to access. And thinking, about art as a way to bring down perhaps some perceptions that walking isn't what one does, or doesn't acknowledge or recognise that one is already walking in the school walk. It's just not perceived in that way. So I totally agree, Barbara, like we need to be addressing these things, but like we've got a double problem. It's walking and art. And there's demographic barriers there, really.
Well, Fiona, I know you've had your hand up, and I was going to come to you anyway, because you've mentioned already about how it was important for you to bring the art out into the walking art out and outside as well. And we'll come back to you, Misha, because you've about to say something. And yeah, go for it, Fiona.
Yeah, exactly. So this question about who is actually not walking, or why, who can walk, who is able to walk, was part of the exhibition, because we were, of course, confronted with a lot of questions out of this. Okay, we're in the middle of Europe, in Germany, and we are so privileged to be able to focus on world problems. So we did have to also take a look on those people who have to walk, who cannot decide on taking the bus or just sitting in the car, or even have a driver taking them from A to B. So the necessity to use walking to flee from their homes, or just walk to work, have been very important also in topics of privilege. And so we included a whole section called Not Walking, where we wanted to address the social rules or barriers we have to face when we walk. We all, I start with myself, although I'm privileged, having grown up in Europe, it's like I'm a woman, I shouldn't walk in several places because it's dangerous because I'm a woman. But also people who are handicapped or blind or visual impaired or black or people of color or in the wrong gender, or so we really wanted to address also these. So we had Pope L and Carmen Papalia, and also Senior Pierce was an interesting video we included, because it really showed it was a video made in the US, and the person in the video, you couldn't really see, is it a woman, is it a man, what kind of gender is this person, and she was wearing a mask, a mirrored mask. So it was, for us, it was important, but it was also difficult to include it in the exhibition, because we really wanted to have this aspect. And what I also found important to include, and that was difficult, how to include migrants or people with migrants background in the exhibition. How could we address their walking necessities? So we were happy to have also some, for example, Bushra Khalili, who made a piece of the roots of migrants, and so there were several. And I really was hoping that art and an exhibition of art, for example, walking art, would open up the field of discussing these topics, or also lead a way to discuss these topics on a different level, not in the just in between us who were walking, who love art. And I definitely think that art opens a lot of doors for include walking into the society, bring it back to the people. Art can really, and this is something as an art historian realize, we all, or most of us, have walking experience. And when I talk to people about my research, they like, why walk? Why can walking be art? And for me, it is very important to get them going, get them walking, get them to have this walking experience, ideally in the context of art, so they can really feel the special moment and interact and have this walking encounter to have this special setting, which I think is mostly needed to differ it from everyday common walking. And that makes it so special, but can also help, what is the word? Going back into the everyday normal life to see how the awareness, build the awareness of I'm able to walk, and why don't I walk more often? Why don't I include more people to go for a walk with me? And I think the pandemic helped us bringing walking back into our minds out of leisure, and show us a little bit that walking can be very important for our psyche and for our health. Not because our doctor says go 10,000 paces every day, but yeah, meet people, interact, and yeah, I think vice versa. It can open a field. Like, why can't we walk? But how could we walk? Maybe like this.
No, it's great. Really good. Misha, you wanted to say something. I want to come back to Het because Het's having a bit of a side conversation about something completely different. So I don't want to sort of miss that. So Misha, have a pitch in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of just, I think, not what I want to say said, but just was going to, from the experience I had walking with refugees through my project Way From Home, one of the things that was often told by participants was that they couldn't walk because it took money to walk, which I thought was interesting, because they had to have a reason, and the reason within the kind of city, and these are mostly walking in cities, was that you had to buy something, have that kind of sense of purpose for being there, which I found that was interesting. They found that walking through the project kind of liberated them from that they had another reason, and that's where the kind of art came in to kind of give that permission and that place for that. And I think that's, and that echoes from what, Dee and Claire have been doing in Walk Create. The other thing was that, women who I didn't walk with many women until I went to Nottingham and walked with a group of women, African women, migrants, and who wanted to walk as a group, because that was one of the things that when I approached individual women, they weren't comfortable, or it went against the kind of cultural behavior to walk with a stranger, even though as a woman, and to feel comfortable, particularly with, wearing veils. At that time, this was in 2002 to 2004 that I was doing those walks. So that was something, that was interesting, that I wasn't able to break through that until we actually walked to Nottingham as a group. And then it was a different sense of, liberation to do that in the company, and also for that walk to be very much guided by a woman that they trust, a kind of leader, elder in that. So handing over to someone else really to kind of take that where they wanted to go. So I think that's, think the debate that's kind of going through the chat about taking, I found it curious of, taking walking beyond art. Well, it's taken, how long to kind of get art recognized, walking art recognized as art, and actually what it is that it's doing that's really important to enable people to walk who are not able to walk for different reasons. So I think that's what I kind of wanted to come back to that part of that discussion.
Yeah, great, Misha, that's fab. Het, but just before we come to you, Barbara, do you have a response to the things that you've heard? Do you want to chip in and say anything in kind of response to what you've heard?
I don't have a response except to say that the responses from others have been so rich, and I have homework to do. So I'm going to follow up with the websites and so on, but it's wonderful to hear and to learn more about the different things that have already happened and are happening in response to the kinds of things that I raise. So I'm very appreciative of the richness of the responses. So thank you. And also just to say, I'm going to probably have to leave in a few minutes. So but it's not because it's not a wonderful forum. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barbara. Okay, Het has been having a little side correspondence. I'm not sure with whom. Is it Claire you've been having it with? But anyway, a chance for you, Het, to just voice something of what you're saying. And I've got a couple of questions stacked up. But this is a lot about involving people beyond the UK or Northern Hemisphere. This is trying to reach out to people not necessarily.
Actually, Andrew, I was reacting on what Claire said all in the beginning. It was not really meant to it meandered a bit along, but anyway, and it has much to do with what was discussed till now. But to go to hook it at what the last thing that was said, I had the privilege to work around the world with young people and young artists. From Puerto Rico to Mexico to Latin America, now in Africa, and at the same time in the States and in the UK and in Europe, and everywhere where I talk about walking as an art, except in one place, Cyprus, but that's another story, where I was actually looked at as a completely crazy person when I was talking for a group of people, young people, about walking as an art. In all other places, I felt an understanding, an immediate understanding that walking can transform, that walking in group is an uninvasive, very gentle way of getting things to change, and as such, has an imaginary and artistic potential. So this both in the north and in south, and as well with the other project that I'm developing with Supercluster, we bring together these communities from the north and the southern hemisphere in a very natural, the beyond any cultural or social or other differences that they may have. Walking really, is my feeling, brings people together in a way that other ways of being together are not allowing to. Now, I have the feeling that Sideways, although I was at that moment living in Brazil, so I was not part of it, but what I heard about it is that it really was like a shockwave. I have the feeling that Sideways was one of these events, or maybe the event, where by bringing so much people together, by walking together with so much people, a sort of critical mass was released. And this was the magic of it, just that people were walking together. These are just thoughts that I throw into the mix of this all amazing ideas that are coming up right now.
Okay, well, yep, Andrea, you have a hand up, so far away.
Well, hi everyone. Mine is not really a question. I'm throwing there just thinking at this conversation that we're having here. As a long distance walker, many other people, there are many people. I've been walking several Camino in Spain, and then last year walked from England to Italy. And then I met a lot of people walking. Okay, then walking is fundamental for human being, but as well, it becomes something where on a long distance walking, which is not a stroll outside here, people questioning what mean to live, to be here. And then I think the big struggle here for the majority of people that maybe is not in academia or not within the art world is to move away from the idea that art is a painting or is a sculpture. And I think that is the bigger issue. Because when I say to people, look, I'm making art installation, people say, what the hell is art installation? You know, the general public doesn't have the knowledge, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. As in the knowledge that painting is not something just traditional, like, I don't know, Michelangelo or Raphael or all those very well-known painters of the past. or sculptural artists of the past. And I wanted just to throw these things out there because this is the experience I have in every time I'm going outside for a walk.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say yes. Also because it's a contemporary form of making art and expressing yourself. And I always wonder why this is not common yet. I mean, this is not only contemporary art, but art installations and performance art has been out there for ages. You know, why isn't that out there in the minds of the common group? I don't know the common group, but I because I'm in this art world bubble. But whenever I step out and talk to other people who have different jobs and don't have anything to do with art and the art world, I experience that I need to talk to them in a completely different language and use completely different words, and sometimes start from A and from Adam and Eve, to explain what is being done, you know. So yeah, Andrea, it's really yeah. Let's get walking art become more common.
Okay, Dee, do picture and Dee.
I mean, yeah, I think, you know, I don't dispute any of that. I suppose it's a number of things come to mind. I suppose walking art itself is quite diverse in all of its different practices, and I think one of the things that we did in Walk Create, we've made a digital gallery of walking art made by artists across the UK during lockdown. And if you take a look at that digital gallery, there's about 140 or odd pieces of artwork there, and they're so vast in their range. And the only criteria really was that anyone who submitted a piece of artwork for that digital gallery recognised that they were using walking as some sort of process, practice, media or output, really. So I guess it's just like when we say walking art, it includes so many different things. And for Walk Create, we actually didn't use the term walking art. We used creative walking as a way, I think, to address that. Perhaps, you know, as I've been talking about, that sense of the perception of art as being quite exclusive and excluding, and creative walking perhaps potentially sticking to something a bit more inclusive, because it's about creativity perhaps rather than art's output, and maybe it is incumbent on us artists to create those bridges to those organisations who perhaps work with different communities in different ways, you know, to make that bridge there, to try and do that work of translation. And we've tried to do that with walking organisations like Ramblers. You know, if you're in the UK, you know, it's a very traditional, like charitable, part of the charitable sector, voluntary organisation that really is about walking and rights to access land, but also Living Streets, you know, a campaigning organisation, again about active travel, cycling and walking, a lot of them orientated towards climate crises and the sort of need to support folk to walk, health organisations recognising the health benefits of walking, and you know, working with these organisations and I guess demonstrating through example what creative walking could be, did do something to dissolve those barriers, in terms of, I guess, diminishing a sense of trepidation and insecurity about people in those organisations having the right to engage with creativity, and the people that they work with, you know, having the right, feeling the ownership of the right to engage with creative practices. And what was really interesting in one way was once we began to break it down a little bit to, you know, Claire's mentioned there the daily walk to school that Shona Short supported, you know, mums in Bolton in the north of England with, that many folk actually in their everyday walking practices are engaging with creative activities. And in the survey that Morag Rose led for us, which had 1,200 respondents, the majority of them, indeed, once we gave a list of sort of examples, ticked that and confirmed that they had been engaging with creative walking during the pandemic. They just might not have used that term. And some folk, I think, felt very seen and acknowledged in that they could claim that. So there's a lot there to unpack, I guess. Something about access, something about terms, something about education, something about insecurity, something, I don't want to diminish the word art, but something about democratising that practice as much as walking. It's the same comment I made before, I guess. Thank you. I'll stop. That was a long, rambling answer.
Can I come in there, Andrew, just to bring us back to Sideways? And one of the things that, I think a critique about that, and Adi, we've had this conversation about this, was, the sense of sometimes it felt like we were just passing through these communities. We were this village, and sometimes it felt like we were this kind of self-contained, and, that, there were moments where those, like when we were collecting donations and having conversations where, we would have the conversation with why we're there and what we're doing, but that real sense of the message of the action of that walking those pathways that I spoke of before at the beginning when I spoke, I think there are ways in which that could have been more powerfully activated by breaking down those barriers of the art on the move. At the hubs during Sideways, we were doing all of that interaction with the public. So I think that was one thing, I kind of look back and I think it was amazing and it was great, but I think, that was problematic, and it was some kind of ethical thing too, that you're walking through people's neighborhoods en masse with a group of people without any, there's a sense of, like you're invading the neighborhood. Why? So it's, to kind of bring it back to that moment. And I think like the project that you guys have been doing is brilliant, to kind of translate that. I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it, the creative walking, because it did. People had to walk and they had to make ways to do that within those limitations that we were in during this the pandemic. But it's things like that how do we kind of give that access? That's all. Take us back there.
Okay, no, that's great. Hertz raised his hand, but I just wanted to make sure that people in the, who aren't on the panel, I know it's quite difficult if you've hidden your video that I can't see you waving at me. But if you do want to say something, do chip it in the chat, or we could try the virtual hand. I have spotted head. What I was just going to say on what Misha was saying about walking through on the Sideways, I mean, what was extraordinary also was that Belgium, a lot of it is suburbia. So we were actually walking through suburbia. And it's a bit unlike the UK, because the UK you can go on a walk and travel quite a long distance before you get to a village boundary, and then you might encounter the village, you might get to the village. But with Belgium, it seemed to be almost all large sections of it were kind of suburbia, and it was really bizarre experience of walking through these areas. And as you rightly say, I'm not sure whether that's actually more a question about suburbia than it is about engaging with people who live in places. It's just that people in suburbia tend to be very tied to their cars and aren't walking around their local streets because there aren't footways to do it on. Anyway, so that's an aside. Hert, back to you.
Yes, and coming back to one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, the funding and walking arts. And again, once acknowledging Andy for the giant that he is, because he succeeded in gathering, I think, a budget of around 300k euros to make this Sideways happen. But he was very disappointed and struck by the fact that not 1 cent of this money came from the Arts Council or from cultural arts, at least in Belgium, not. And I as well, as a member of the Art Council, I had to fight various times because the esteemed members of the commission, they had as opinion that walking arts is something that is done by a very small minority in the UK, and for the rest has no significance at all. So there is no well, let's say that at the side of these commissions, the funders, there is very little understanding of what really happens with walking arts. And unique was that at that time in 2012, such let's say almost a global event was organized by just by the power and conviction of one, about many people, but let's say that Andy was the one that was the motor of everything to get it started, the catalyst. Now, maybe I'm now opening Pandora's box and then to start to talking about money, but I think it is still problematic in this field.
One of the areas that I was just going to pick up on also, I don't know whether Marianne Lejeune wants to say anything, because I know she has been to 2 or 3 Walk 21s, and I've also been to quite a few Walk 21 conferences, and one is about to begin tomorrow in Dublin. And Walk 21, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, was a series begun in 2000. There was in 1997, there was a demonstration project funded by the EU and the Department for Transport to create demonstration projects to promote pedestrian opportunities to walk within cities. And it was very far-reaching and broad, and they produced a fantastic sort of catalogue and project. And the project officer for that was a guy called Jim Walker, rather appropriately named. Anyway, Jim and his then soon-to-become wife, partner, Bronwyn Thornton, went on and have rolled out Walk 21 every year, absolutely incredible, all around the world. And these walking conferences are extraordinarily expensive to put on, and they're extraordinarily intensive, and they have loads of threads and themes running each time, and they involve a vast number of people who are sort of public health or transport or urban design professionals or city planners. And occasionally walking artists somehow manage to get in on the program. And I know Marianne Lejeune has been to a couple of these Walk 21s. I'm not sure whether you were putting forward a proposal or not. You may be able to tell us. But Rights and Sites were involved early on in Walk 21. I was hoping Stephen Hodge was going to be on the call, and we might get something from him. But and Barbara, actually, who's just left, she was at Walk 21 in Vancouver. But I mean, honestly, there were practically no walking artists involved in the Walk 21 conference, and yet the conference attracts 600 people, paying 250 euros to go. It's a huge thing. To give you an idea of the prices, the city of Sydney underwrote it for 480,000 Australian dollars. So that just gives you an idea of the amounts of money being put into a 5-day conference or a 4-day conference. So anyway, is Marianne there? I'm sure. Brilliant.
Yes, hi. Yeah. Do you hear me?
We do.
Okay. No, I just was once in the conference in Munich because it was close to where I live, and I met Barbara Launder there, so it was cool to see her. But I was not so pleased in the way, or I was not. They invited artists to come, but it was not really good integrated in the program. And then at the end, it was really a way of side events that wasn't really frequented for a lot of people. So I was not really, I think, was not a place where this interaction between like an artistic position with more planners and things was really. I don't know if this has become better, but it wasn't in the Munich year. So.
And no, I'd just be interested, has any one of the panel been invited to speak at a Walk 21 conference? So, it's kind of interesting, because it's rolling around every year. It's a huge theatre, a huge caravan. Massive. Anyway, look, we're over the sort of 90 minutes. I think what we should be doing is wrapping it up. I'm going to give the panelists one last chance to pitch in their final words. So, Claire's just sent me a little note saying she's going to have to go. So give Claire the first chance to give the final words. Then we'll whip round the panelists and end it there. So, Claire.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone. It's really great to hear people's kind of recollections and thoughts, and to sort of see, I think, how much kind of walking art as a practice has kind of moved in the last 10 years. And yeah, I'm a lot of what people have written in the chat as well has really resonated with me. I think of myself primarily as an artist, just a kind of academic interloper, and I think there is a lot more that creative walking and walking art and art practices that use media that are very everyday and often accessible and often part of people's routines. There's a lot that they can do to kind of open up and invite people who might not normally participate in arts or cultural activities, or who might not participate in kind of physical exercise, to do both, and without not wanting to be too instrumentalist. I think that those things are important because they are gateways to the kind of radical joy in imaginative practice and participation in, which is kind of what makes us human. So, not to be like, oh great, people go for a walk and they didn't normally do exercise, or people took part in culture and they don't usually do that, but really because those things are roots to like imaginative, creative experiences that are transformational.
Brilliant. Who wants to go next? Last words.
So I'll just go after, if we were doing the same order. I think Claire's leaving anyway. I want to say, I'm going to push the instrumental. I want to say walking arts need to get themselves into the social and cultural prescription frameworks, because that is a door that we should be pushing at, and not just for the sake of it, but because actually I really do believe in the value of walking art in its multiple values. And I also think we shouldn't forget that inside walking art, there are wider radical resistances to be enacted against systemic oppressions. So the walking art movement as a demonstration against all sorts of systemic inequality, including, for example, air pollution. Not all walks are equal.
Great, thank you. Right, who's up next for the final word? It's between Fiona, Het and Misha.
I will just jump in, Dad. Thanks for having me, and it was great to also meet new faces and new voices in this topic. And since we were putting up the Walk 21 conference, which is held every year, and we were all wondering why none of us was part of that or in the panelists, maybe we should, if we want walking as an artistic or creative practice, be more part of these open discussions in society, but also in cityscaping. We should just keep on writing them and just jump in there and say there's this big aspect of artists and artistic practice and psychology and physiology and all these topics which need to be addressed and spoken and have a panel and voices, and included, because walking is such a social practice and can bring people together, and also work in create more understanding for the individual challenges we all have in our lives and in our countries and in our societies. So, well, maybe this is something I'm trying to engage myself more, apart from bringing more of the politics into art or into my research, because I think this is something I can do and open up the discussion in the bubble I'm living and working in.
So, Misha, may I have the the pleasure and to give you the burden of for the last words, and actually again the Sideways, although I was not there, is a lighthouse that still is shining over the many years, and actually much things that happened. It seemed to have happened on the right time, on the right place, and then becoming a very symbolical event as much as it was a physically important event. And that all the activities that led to it or that happened after, which we were part as well as producers, actors in the walking arts, seems to be a sort of hologram of Sideways, broken into pieces, but still containing everything that happened there. Now, for my 5 cents about walking art is that I not only consider it as a supreme form of agency, that walking gives you a freedom of movement to decide which direction you go, and that is not actually limited by linearity, that it is something that is creative, because your movement is not only about free movement physically, but it is also in the mind and in imagination, creating freedom. And but even more important for me is that walking is a celebration. Walking is joy. Walking is something you don't need anything for. Walking is just something you experience. You are a walk. And in every minute of it is a pleasure, because it doesn't lead to anything. It doesn't want you to do or consume anything, and it makes you just happy.
So shall I finish off? I'm running out of steam. This is late in my day for me, but I think one of the things I'm just thinking about, I keep coming back to, is the importance of walking in relationship to place, and the way that I was really impacted being in Australia and the First Nation, the First Nation people of Australia, and that connection, that 60,000 years or more connection to that place, and the practices of storytelling wrapped up with land and country and walking, and really, this is how we hand down knowledge, how we gain knowledge of place, we care for it, I think I can't articulate myself anymore at this time of day, but this is really what I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. I had the pleasure to run a workshop with cultural anthropologist David Turnbull, who's more than an anthropologist, but in Australia, and that was one of the things, just kind of really interesting, looking at kind of how walking the land became possible through the development of thread to weave baskets to carry food, and that then the walking carries the stories and the knowledge of the land through the generations. So there are these concepts which I think are really profound, and kind of take where art and walking kind of comes together for me, and why it's so important, I think, for our survival on this planet, is that we have to understand where we are, and we have to care for where we are, and for those generations of people who've come before us and will come after us. So I think that's well.
Wow, well done in summing up. I think that is no. I think that's really that's great.
Is that coherent?
Well, I want to thank you all. Now, this is key for those of you who are left. If you want to keep the chat, you have to go down to those three buttons on the bottom right-hand side and download it. Okay, so download the chat now, because the chat disappears instantly, if I dare say it, once the meeting is over, and I can't retrieve it unless I've saved it. So I've just saved it myself. So that's the next thing. The other thing is, obviously, there are some other events coming up on Soundwalk September, and we'd love to have you along. The cafes are coming up. We've got Storage Sunday on Sunday, as well as a meeting online with Pressbus, as well as some link there on Tuesday. And we also have a poetry event coming up on Monday week. But in the meantime, everyone, thanks so much for coming along and joining in. And a special thanks to Clara, who's not here at the moment, but Dee, Misha, Het, Fiona and Claire. And thanks, everyone. Go well and safely tomorrow. And enjoy walking, I think is what we'll say.
Thanks, Andrew. Lovely to see everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Bye.